Hello and welcome back, everybody, to Arcane Eye. Today we're going to be talking about Dragonlance Session Zero. We're going to learn about the world. We're going to learn about character creation, and it's essentially just a run-up session before we start playing the actual Dragonlance campaign, which has dropped today. Very exciting, everybody, isn't it? I'm joined here by Chris and Russ, who both look extremely excited that
Yes,
that Dragonlance has dropped today. Are you guys giant Dragonlance fans? Have how much do you know about Dragonlance?
well,
Nothing.
yeah, I was largely unaware, but I did get up at the butt crack of noon today to read over as much of this book as I can, try and gain some understanding.
Well, I'm here to hold your guys' hand as we walk through it. I'm looking at my bookshelf now, and I see between 9 and 12 Dragonlance books. So I know plenty about the world. I also write a bunch of articles on D&D Beyond about Dragonlance. You can go
Do you?
check them out. Yeah, there's probably, let's see how many I have on up on D&D Beyond right now,
Who
specifically
wrote
for
them?
who wrote them? Me. So I have one, two specifically about three specifically, four about Dragonlance. So yeah, I guess I'm what you would call kind of an expert on Dragonlance, although I'm definitely not. Um, so we're gonna start with talking about what the setting is. Um, the world of Krynn, which is where Dragonlance takes place. We're gonna go through a very, very, very brief part of the history that will give you guys some frame of mind for where this adventure starts. But the majority of the time today is going to be spent on creating our characters. You guys are going to create your player characters for the campaign. I'm going to create a character just for fun. I'm going to be DMing the campaign. Maybe it'll get used, maybe it won't. But as the DM, I just don't get to create characters often, so it's always fun. Um, so to start off, what is Dragonlance? Um,
What is Dragon?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Dragonlance started as a D&D campaign created by Tracy Hickman. Tracy and Margaret Weiss wrote a series of novels based on their game in the 80s, and it became a really famous series of novels and thus D&D setting, especially for like the second and third editions. Um, the original novels followed a group of heroes through an event called the War of the Lance. This war is kind of like the main focal point of Dragonlance, specifically because the most popular books happened during this time. Um, Unfortunately, for people that really, really like Dragonlance, Wizards of the Coast has kind of skirted around a lot of the pre-established lore. They don't touch on pretty much anybody that appeared in the books, apart from one guy called Lord Soth, who's actually a total fucking badass. He's a Death Knight, so like a paladin who went against his oath and got a bunch of necromantic powers. He shows up in the book and is, yeah, just generally a total badass.
And he's called Lord Sock.
Lord Soth.
Okay.
Um,
And then so just seeing as you introduced this guy,
yeah,
I'm all of a sudden thinking like, so during you said the war of the Lance
yeah,
or the Lance.
the Lance.
Um, so during the war of the Lance, like who was fighting in the war, and was there like clearly a good and a bad? Like, was there like the Axis and the Allies, or like where there's clearly like a good versus evil sort of thing going on,
So
or what
definitely,
can you tell me about that?
I would say that there was a lot of inspiration drawn from Tolkien stuff. When it came to Dragonlance, you'll hear about that more when we get into the races. Um,
Right.
but it is straight up the good guys versus this evil dragon queen. Her name is Takesis. She is one of the pantheon of Krynn is split into good, neutral, and evil gods. So very, very black and white, and I guess gray in the middle there. Paladin is known as Bahamut on other worlds and like the Forgotten Realms, whereas Takesis is also known as Tiamat, which you guys I've probably dropped. I don't think we've ever.
Tiamat swoops from the sky.
Yeah, it's Tiamat swoops from the sky. Yeah. So she's a badass 5-headed dragon that commands other chromatic dragons and is generally just looking to overthrow free will whenever she can. In order to talk about the War of the Lance, we need to kind of step back and go through the history a little bit. So since the very beginning of the world a couple millennia ago, Takesis and Paladin have always just been duking it out. The metallic dragons versus the chromatic dragons, good versus evil. It's this constant cycle of them just warring with each other. Eventually, I think it was called like the Third Dragon War, which happened, another couple thousand years later. Takesis gets banished from the material plane. She's defeated in war by heroes that have forged the first Dragonlances. Her and her chromatic dragons are defeated, banished, sent away, and then the metallic dragons are like, you know what, sounds good. In order to create a balance, we'll dip as well. So then that started what was called the Age of Might, and this is when the mortal races of Krynn really started to flourish. One empire in particular, called Istar, they're also known as the Holy Empire of Istar. They're kind of like the fanatical good guys who are like, we need to defeat evil at the expense of everything. And they've even gone to such lengths to like start monitoring people's thoughts. Eventually.
So are those guys like elves or humans?
They're humans
in particular.
And eventually they reach a point where the leader of the Holy Empire of Istar starts calling himself a king priest. And
right, I heard of that guy when I was reading through some of this.
Yeah, so he's not a good guy. He tries to ascend. He tries to ascend to godhood, and then the gods of Krynn are like, we're not going to have any of that. They try to send some warnings, and the king priest is like, no, this is evil trying to stop me. And I'm not sure. I guess it's not spoilers to talk about it. I think it's talked about in the introduction of the book. Lord Soth is actually tasked to stop this king priest from ascending, and Lord Soth fails in his task, and thus the cataclysm happens. And the cataclysm is when the gods of Krynn throw, I'm pretty sure it was quote unquote a fiery mountain at Istar. They obliterated the empire's capital and devastated the entire continent. And it was essentially an apocalyptic level event. It sent the races of the people of Krynn back to the Stone Age. Dwarves slammed shut the doors to their underground kingdoms. Elves retreated back into their realms. Humans became nomads. Everyone was struck with like famine, and there wasn't enough food, and tribes were warring amongst each other. It was a really rough 300 years. But since that time, humanity has recovered, but it's still relatively a shell of what they were before the cataclysm. And this time period is when the War of the Lance takes place. It's when the adventure starts. So the cataclysm was in recent enough history that it's probably impacted all of the characters that are going to be showing up in this setting. But you haven't, unless you're an elf or a long-lived dwarf, probably didn't experience it firsthand.
Right. So it's like a few generations ago.
Yeah, a few generations ago.
For a human.
And, the strong civilization, the strong communities of humans have like rebuilt cities and their villages. They're not all nomads anymore. It's definitely more of like a medieval Europe setting, but yeah, it's definitely not like a high magic golden age that it was prior to this fiery mountain descending on the continent.
Do people still worship the gods since they like tossed a volcano at them?
I'm glad that you asked that. That's actually a very good question. After the gods tossed a volcano at them, they left. They said maybe
The gods left.
yeah. They said maybe this world would be better without us, and they just straight up left. And like they took all of their true followers with them. So clerics specifically are something that probably up until this exact point nobody has seen. In the War of the Lance, clerics make a reemergence where because the gods have started to come back because Takesis is starting to show her presence again. So the gods are like, maybe we should step in and figure this shit out. So if a common person were to see somebody perform like divine healing, they would be like, what the fuck was that?
Right. So is that like for like divine magic, like divinity magic specifically, or is that for like all kinds of like powerful magic?
So
is that
I would
kind of
say
lost in the world right now?
magic specifically.
Right.
There are still other kinds of magic, like elves or people who live amongst elves, or very deep into nature could still probably channel like druidic magic. And there are a faction. There's a faction on Krynn called it used to be called the Wizards of High Sorcery in the books, but in this new Dragonlance adventure, it's referred to as the Mages of High Sorcery, because you're supposed to be able to, like, if you're a wizard or a sorcerer or a warlock, you can join. You don't have to be a wizard. But arcane magic is certainly still a thing on Krynn. But
okay, so if we create a
trusted.
character that is, if we're like a wizard or a warlock with some magic, we're not like a complete freak of nature.
You're not a freak of nature, but people are definitely going to be suspicious of you.
Interesting. So there'll be like a bit of kind of stealth required, at least in the early days.
Yeah.
Like when it comes to using the magic. So you said in the War of the Lance that so I'm just to make it clear, I'm slightly focused on gods right now because as I was like looking at the book, I really got drawn to Kiri Jolith, who is the god of war.
Oh,
he's like
cool.
this big like minotaur looking, blue minotaur sort of looking guy.
Right.
And I thought he sounded really cool. And I was wondering if in like, it sounds like with what's happening in the world present day, with where we're going to be at with the campaign, that this guy is going to be like trying to like gather followers to bring his faith kind of back to Krynn. I'm sure I read something along those lines.
So Kiri Jolith is certainly tied to one of the knightly orders of the Knights of Solamnia, which is a background that you can choose from this adventure. Essentially, the Cole's notes on the Knights of Solamnia are kind of like the knights in shining armor of Krynn. They have an honor-bound system, and they really dedicated themselves to protecting the defenseless. Unfortunately, when the Holy Empire of Istar was coming up, they allied themselves with Istar. So then when the king priests of Istar caused the cataclysm, a lot of people blame the Knights of Solamnia for allowing that to happen, which has kind of tarnished their pride a little bit and has caused people to not look at them very, very well. A lot of knights have stopped following their strict code of conduct because they aren't viewed very well. They're like, why are we risking our lives to defend people who hate us? And those people have kind of like retreated to their citadels and are being selfish, whereas there are some Knights of Solamnia who are still dedicated to their oaths and will seek justice where they can. So if you wanted to follow the path of Kiri Jolith, you could follow, like, be one of the Knights of the Sword, which is, an order that's dedicated to slaying the dragon and courageous, heroic quests and that kind of stuff.
Okay. And then regarding the knightly orders, like I was seeing that there's the crown, the sword, and the rose, like kind of the different tiers of knighthood for the Solamic Knights. So the crown is kind of like the entry level knight position.
It's kind of the entry level. As we'll see when we look at character options, essentially each of these orders are represented by a feat that you can take, but you don't really have to work your way up in the feat system. Like, I think all of them unlock at the 4th level, so you can really choose whatever you want to be. I think that in this adventure, based on what I read, there's no real overseeing body for the Knights of Solamnia. So like maybe like your father was a Knight of the Sword and like passed down his sword to you, and like you kind of like use a different sword because you don't feel like you truly deserve the weapon that your father gave you, and then like one time you like defend the defenseless, and somebody comes along and is like, hey, like, you're worthy of the Knights of the Sword, and then you're able to pull out this like badass great sword that is a Knight of the Sword's worthy weapon.
Right, and that's like a +6 greatsword, right?
Yeah, exactly, because this definitely has room for legendary weapons, even though it only goes up to level 11. +6.
Oh, is that right? Okay, I hadn't even covered that yet.
The adventure in the book goes from 1st to 11th level. So when we take a look at building our characters, we'll want to take a look. We're not going to go through the entire process of being like, this is what's going to happen when I level up all the way to level 11. But you definitely want to start taking a look forward, because another thing is that combat in this adventure has been dialed up a notch, just because Krynn is all about war and all about battle, and there are particular powerful character options available. The challenge rating of encounters is definitely on the higher end of the spectrum.
But they should be balanced by the extra like powers and tools and things that we'll be able to use.
Yeah, I think that let's dive into this, because I think that it says right here that whatever background you choose for a character in a Dragonlance campaign, you gain bonus feats as detailed below. Characters involved in the War of the Krynn or other conflicts on Krynn are changed by the dramatic experiences they face. So you get a first level, you get a free feat between skilled and tough. At first level, unless you choose the Knight of Solamnia or Mage of High Sorcery background, at which point you get a different specific feat that's in this book. And then at 4th level, you get another free bonus feat, so you don't have to, like, you could take a feat from your ability score increase and get a bonus feat both at level 4. And there's some pretty powerful options here. So the feats included in this book are strong. I talk a little bit about them in my Dragonlance review, which is up on my website now, arcaneeye.com. Go check it out. But yeah, like all the Adept of the Black Robes, Red Robes, White Robes, and the knightly feats are quite strong when compared to non-Dragonlance feats. And then the other one, the player's handbooks ones that they've listed, Alert, Mobile, Sentinel, and Warcaster, are all like S or A tier feats on my feat tier list, which is also on Arcane.
Yeah, I remember I had Alert when we went through like a 20 level campaign. And I think Alert was like, was that the one that gave me like +10 initiative or something mental like that?
I think it's +5 to initiative, and then you can't be surprised.
That was it. Yeah, that came in handy more than I thought it would.
Yeah,
so,
it's absolutely
it's a good feat.
Mobile's also sick.
Cloak does that as well.
Did I have a cloak you had a weapon that did that, so I just kind of got to the point where I was like, I'm never surprising these guys ever. So
Cloak of no surprise.
Yeah, definitely didn't. I think you had like the staff. It was like the staff of the Sentinel or something like that. And then you can get Sentinel and Warcaster, which are like, honestly, just Sentinel being there is insane. Like, yeah. So
I feel like I should know what Sentinel is. Like I've probably read the description of it before.
Somebody is an enemy that's within 5 feet of you attacks another creature, you can use your reaction to attack it, and then if you hit somebody with an opportunity attack, their speed becomes 0. So if you combine that with something like Polearm Master, where you're able to attack when somebody gets into your reach, you can absolutely just shut down people. It's a really busted combo, and if you guys play it, I'll murder you with the dragon. So there's that.
There's always a way. So you mentioned about the challenge rating being like set a little higher for encounters and stuff in this. For and a big part of that is for some balancing to go along with these like extra feats that you can add at 1st and 4th level for your characters.
Yes. So the extra power that your characters get is supposedly supposed to balance out with the increased challenge rating. The other reason that the challenge rating is a little bit higher is we're going to see a lot of mass combat in this. So there'll be a lot of situations where you guys are out on a battlefield and there's battles happening all around you, but we're focused in on your little skirmish. And there are like random events that happen. Like sometimes like a dragon rider is gonna like fall from the sky. Like sometimes a flight of arrows is gonna be aimed at your party. Sometimes an enemy is gonna jump in. Sometimes an ally is gonna jump in. It's really cool and dynamic in that way.
Right.
For anybody that's watching that's interested, this campaign is also got released with a board game that goes along with it that is supposed to help simulate mass battle. It's called Warriors of Krynn, and I think you can only get it if you buy like the $150 deluxe version, which I haven't done and doesn't really make sense for us to do, seeing as we're playing remote. I might check it out at some point, but we're not going to use it as part of this campaign.
Okay, so with
Arcane Eye.
Yeah, honestly,
That's true.
I looked on like BoardGameGeeks.com and it said that like I think the single copies of it was shipping out in like March or something. So you might have to wait a while.
Yeah. Well, for like the extra, like I'm just thinking about like our party size. Like we're working under the assumption that like once we get started on the campaign, that we'll be there'll be probably an extra player involved, so we have like a DM and 3 player characters.
Yeah, at least.
Yeah, potentially 4 player characters, I guess. And then, so do we know if like, because we talked about like challenge ratings being set, do we know if there is like an ideal party size for
they say
for the campaign?
It's 3 to 5. I think that if you have 3, you're either going to be... So there are a couple of NPCs that will join your party throughout this campaign. I think that also comes into the challenge rating balance.
Right.
Maybe another DM NPC joins in. Maybe you get to a point like, if we're just playing with 2 player characters, I might give you each like a sidekick or a squire or something.
I love a squire.
Yeah, that would be pretty cool.
Because I feel like that'll really help round it out to be to get the party's power level to where we need to go. I would say that you're definitely gonna want to focus on healing in this. Like you don't want to be caught in a Dragonlance campaign with only one healer, because if they go down, you're fucked. So I would say
So,
like,
but I mean,
Well,
we've talked
there's only
about
two of
potential.
us, so we couldn't have.
We've talked
It would be
ab-
pretty weird if we were both healers.
well, like you could have a druid and a cleric; those both have healing. You could have throw a paladin in there, or like even like a fighter that they have the ability to self heal with second wind. Like you want some kind of ability that's going to allow you to heal up a little bit. And I think that there are very few classes that actually have none. Like unless you guys both, like one of you was a wizard and the other was a sorcerer, I think you'll be fine. But yeah, more healing options the better for sure.
Yeah, I think I'd be more inclined to be like martial focused if we went the way of being knights, because
Yeah.
that just makes logical sense to me.
Are you guys both going to be
But-
Knights of Salamia? Because that'll be very
That would be
cool.
cool.
I'd be
I
down.
mean, I think it would be kind of weird for a Knight of Salamia to be traveling around with someone who isn't. But I mean, correct me if I'm wrong.
So this is
Well,
actually
you
really
get odd
fun.
couples in fantasy. That's always fun. Sorry, I am over
Yeah,
talking. But
The delay.
I'll add. I am on lag. I am on a massive delay.
can
But yeah,
manage.
I kind of like. I think two knights traveling together is a really fun idea if they were just on a mish together, but also that like odd couple thing that you get in fantasy where you throw to a really honorable knight with a kind of cutthroat or a dodgy sorcerer.
Yeah, like it
one
could
of
be
you
cool
broaches
if.
Brom and the other one's Brienne or something like that.
Yeah, like I like the idea of if Russ was gonna be like a more noble, die by the sword, live for honor sort of knight. My guy would be a little bit more about serving the Minotaur god and just enjoying war and wanting to take part in war so that I can like bring back the powers of my god.
Okay, well, so let's get into some character creation options then. So in terms of providing you guys a baseline regarding the races and all that kind of stuff, I might. So I'll take you guys through it really quickly because it's good for world building. But based on the sounds of it, you guys will likely both be humans because they mainly make up the Knights of Salamnia. I don't think there are any non-human knights. But to go in an alphabetical order, dwarves in this world, very Tolkien-esque. They're split into mountain and hill dwarves. These people both hate each other because during the Cataclysm, the mountain dwarves locked the hill dwarves out of the mountain and wouldn't let them in. So now they're all mad at each other. The mountain dwarves barely leave their mountains, and the hill dwarves are now kind of like nomads that wander a desert. And they're all probably Scottish because it's very Tolkien. That's
I look forwards to meeting some of them in the campaign.
I can't do a Scottish accent though, unfortunately.
That's why I look forward to it.
Haggis. All they'll say is haggis. Then elves. So they primarily live in three tribes: the Quolinesti, the Sylvanesti, and the Kaganesti. Sylvanesti were the original elf tribe. They're like the hoity-toity high elves. The Quolinesti split off from them and are a little bit less pretentious. And then the Kaganesti are wood elves. Again, it's very Tolkien-esque.
Yeah, Cockney elves.
Exactly. Yes. It's very Tolkien-esque. They don't really give a shit about human stuff, and they think they're better than everyone else. The Sylvanesti more so than others. There's something that isn't really touched on in the adventure at all, but it's briefly touched on in the preamble. Is that one of the dragon armies, so the bad guy armies, invaded Sylvanesti, and then hoping to defeat them, They channeled some pretty fucked up magic and ended up turning their beautiful forest home into a nightmare and have had to leave their home in swaths. So now there's a bunch of hoity-toity high elf refugees that are like knocking on their neighbors' doors, hoping to crash on their couch.
Oh. That's pretty interesting.
Yeah.
When did that happen in relation to like where we are now?
I would say like it's happening
recent?
at the same time.
Oh, okay.
But it's as far as I read, it's really not that touched. I guess it's like it's brought up a little bit, but it doesn't play a huge part, I would say.
So if their home has been turned into a nightmare, but they're all kind of like up themselves high elves, is like their idea of a nightmare just kind of like a pretty standard sort of town? Like
based on what I
Just a
remember
cast
from
on
the
the state.
books, it is a straight up fucking nightmare land.
I like this.
Okay.
I think you say it doesn't matter, but I feel like we're about to dive into this interesting social drama about posh elves having to go live middle-class lives and see how much they cope. Do they know?
It's like
They know
Schitt's
how
Creek.
much a pint of milk costs? How much is a loaf of bread? They don't know. They've never had to
How
pay
much
bills
could a
before.
banana cost? $10?
Yeah. Yeah. Someone doesn't just fill your fire with wood. Yeah. I think I've changed my mind about this campaign.
The next race up are the gnomes. So you had a question about gnome flinging, but first here's my little speech
Yes.
on gnomes. They're chronic inventors that live on Mount Nevermind, which is a volcano on an island removed from the main continent. Gnomes are pretty stereotypical. They're very intelligent, but also scatterbrained and don't really have any sense of safety. Like they will certainly sacrifice themselves when it comes to experimenting. They really don't think like they think these things through, but they consider a failure just like one way it wouldn't work and just kind of plow on through it. But what was your question about gnome flinging?
There's a beautiful illustration on D&D Beyond. Hopefully you can put it on the side here, of a gnome being flung, and it's captioned gnome flinging.
So the gnome flinger, like I said, gnomes are quite inventive. Whether or not it's helpful most of the time is arguable. The gnome flinger is, I believe they use these in Mount Nevermind to like get, because it's a big hollow volcano. So if you want to get from one end to the other, you gnome fling yourself across the chasm and like land in like a series of nets. I think that the one that you're seeing right now has been moved outside of Mount Nevermind and is kind of a pseudo catapult. So sometimes what they do is actually quite useful.
Could it fling other people other than gnomes?
That will be covered in the adventure, so no spoilers.
Good.
Second to last are Kender. Kender certainly have a storied history in D&D and Dragonlance. So they're essentially halflings, but they're a lot more annoying. They are superhumanly curious and immune to fear, which causes them to get into trouble all the time. And something that the new book has shied away from is that they're also kleptomaniacs. Like they just think that everything is for them. They don't really get the concept of stealing. So they steal from party members, they steal from other people, and it just causes a lot of tension in the games. In previous editions, they were considered.
It's so lucky I didn't read this before.
If you were like, I'm going to be a Kender and I'm going to play him as annoying as possible, like he's dead in a session and a half. He will get skewered.
Yeah, I feel like I can't just pick the most annoying character every time.
In previous editions, they were considered they were hated enough that they were considered bad player bait. So like if somebody chose a Kender, people were like, okay, like that's a player you don't want playing at your table. Nowadays, I think that especially with like the shying away from them stealing everything. So if somebody just reads what a Kender is about in this book, they won't play them as annoying as can happen in previous editions. And then last but not
And this is the one race that's kind of more. I think I read earlier in the book that the Kender is the one that's like specific to Dragonlance.
Yeah, they
all the other
originated
races
on Dragonlance, but Wizards made them kind of like multiversal by saying they're so curious that they fall through like interplanar portals. So I think they're saying like, hey, like you can buy this book and use this race in other settings, but
sometimes I get so curious that I fall through interplanar portals myself.
Exactly. It's hard not to at certain points. Last but not least are humans. Humans are humans. They're the most ubiquitous race. They live short lives compared to the other races, so they feel like they have to prove themselves. They're like the movers and shakers of the continent for sure. And I would say that they're like easily the most represented race in this adventure. So, like we were discussing, if you guys both plan on being Knights of Solamnia, then you'll both probably be humans. Which
do we know like a rough number? Like you said that the Knights of Solamnia are like kind of diminished in number.
Mm-hmm.
Since the cataclysm, the volcano tossing. So do we have an idea as to like what our representation is? Like, is there 100 Knights of Solamnia? Is there 1,000? Like, is there 10?
Let's see.
Is it like,
it's not something that's touched on in the adventure, but there's plenty of like third-party sites that we.
Yeah, I guess I'm wondering how much of an exclusive club it is. Being.
I was gonna say, is it like Jedi in A New Hope, where they're just like Jedi, that old mumbo jumbo, where it's like 15 years ago there was like literally.
I can say for certainty without looking it up that like they are enough to field an army at this current time.
So there's thousands of them.
Yeah, there are thousands, and they're probably the dragon armies, which are the evil armies. Biggest adversary is like a united force of Knights of Solamnia can compare to the dragon armies like man for man. Unfortunately, what we'll find out is the dragon armies have more than just manpower, which definitely
have dragon power.
What do they have?
Maybe it's something.
You gotta assume, right?
There are no dragons in this adventure. I don't know what you're talking about.
I don't know. There's a lot of artwork I've seen. So, are the because you said like a unified Knights of Solamnia would be like a big thing. Like, does that mean that right now they're kind of like scattered? Like they don't have like an HQ that they all like don't have like a Witcher headquarters that they all hang out at?
They have they have like a province called Solamnia, which is where they're mainly going to be hanging out. They have a capital city of Salanthus, which is like kind of like the Minas Tirith of the world. Like, you know, it's like the last great bastion of humanity at this point. The issue that the Knights of Solamnia are facing is there's a lot of infighting. A lot of knights have retreated to their because they have like a lot of knights are very old bloods. They have fortresses and keeps, and they have their own knights that answer to them. So a lot of have like drawn their forces in and now hold up in their own keeps. So there are probably a few that, you know, like call it a quarter of them are still with Salanthus and being like, we are going to be Knights of Solamnia and we're going to go where you need us to go and do that kind of stuff. We've kind of shifted away, you know, we've covered races, we've covered kind of what we want to be in terms of our campaign, the characters for our campaign. Do you guys want to talk about classes at all and take a look at.
Yeah, because
play.
I think there's also one or two new classes, or is it just?
So there's
is
one
it,
class. There's the sorcerer subclass, lunar sorcery, which would not fit with a Knight of Solamnia.
Yeah, it's interesting to think. I guess we'll have to go for like the martial magical sort of characters, like your like fighter, ranger, paladin, like those kind of characters that have a bit of.
I was thinking I'd probably need to be a paladin, I think, for being like honorable kind of oath-bound knight. Mike, I'd like to know your opinion. So I really play like martial characters, but I think there's like oath, like crown oath or something like that.
Oath of the Crown, yeah. Is sworn to ideals of civilization, be the spirit of the nation, fealty to sovereign, or service of the deity of law and rulership. Yeah, this would make a great Knight of Solamnia, straight up, like up and down, a paladin, oath of the crown. I think I even talked about it in my Dragonlance backgrounds article up on D&D Beyond. There's a little section here that says which subclasses work best in which orders of Knights of Solamnia. So I think Oath of the Crown Paladins fit into Knights of the Crown. So I think we were talking about this off mic, but you would want your character to kind of like just be coming out of squirehood. So it would make sense that they would be in a Knight of the Crown situation, which would work perfectly for an Oath of the Crown Paladin. You don't take your oath until 3rd level.
Yes.
And we're going to start at 1st level. So actually, depending if we play the interlude or not, we'll start at 1st or 2nd level. But yeah, I think that by the time you get out of kind of like the first section of this adventure, committing to the Oath of the Crown is a solid take for Knight of Solamnia. Chris, I know that you've talked a lot about you want to like devote yourself to Kiri Jolith, and like you seem to be like you said it yourself, like fixated on the god of war. And if you were, I would say that my suggestion, what I would do if I were you, would be a war domain cleric.
Right.
So these guys are badass. They're not kind of like your typical caster where you're like a rinky-dinky guy with a wand. Like you're wearing full heavy armor, you're wielding a mace, you're charging into battle, and you're smiting with the best of them. But it's just like, and I think it'll be a really good offset to playing with the paladin, because paladins have a lot of burst damage. They have a decent amount of healing. They have like tons of HP, tons of armor class. Whereas you would come in there and you have the flexibility of being a full spellcaster. You have lots of healing because you're a cleric.
Right, and there's like Shield of Faith.
Yeah.
There's some decent early stuff that comes with that class.
Yeah,
sure.
and the best part is you get to choose this subclass at 1st level. Oh, hey, look at this, Kiri Jolith right here.
Oh yeah.
So I don't want to like make your character for you, but when you said what you said, I was like, I've written enough class guides to know that war domain would fit.
Yeah, I definitely I like the idea. I really just I wanted to just try a different. I like whenever I create a new character, I like to try a different class in particular. I don't care too much about the races are kind of there for the flavor. Like yet to be being a halfling or whatever is fun, but I don't think I've ever done a cleric before. I can't recall ever feeling a desire to choose to be a cleric. So yeah, I'll definitely look into that as I build out my character. I think that could align nicely, and I think you're right. I think it could pair well with the paladin, as long as like it seems like I can wear a decent armor.
Yeah, you got heavy armor, so you'll be suited up with the best of them.
And do I have like much? is like Divine Strike what would give me kind of like melee ability at later levels?
Yeah, so
I don't.
in terms of melee ability, my class guides cover this, but melee clerics always have to make kind of a decision where it's like, am I going to be a cleric that's slightly suboptimal, but I'm gonna wade into battle, like fucking crush some heads with my mace, while like casting spells, resurrecting the dead, and that kind of stuff? Or am I going to be a suited up spellcaster who's like mainly on the fringes, but is like full in heavy plate armor, and is just like fully devoted to casting spells? I've played a Forge cleric that is essentially the same as a War Domain, where it's like you're suited up in heavy armor, you get bonuses to your attacks, and you're kind of wading into battle and crushing skulls, and it was ridiculously fun. Even if it's like slightly.
Yeah, I was definitely, when you were describing the two options, the first one sounded a lot more fun, and different to, like, I've been a spellcaster before. I've stood on the edge of the battle without heavy armor, with like zero way to defend myself, and just cast spells at people. And it's I think I'd be more interested at wading in.
You know.
Yeah, and like if I'm gonna, like, I loved playing a bard on the peripheries of a battle because it's still fun. Like there's still like something to it. Like you can still add something to it. But if you're not a bard, if you're not adding the performance and the charisma to that sideline spells, then I think I'd rather get involved.
You know, for people who watch this stream, I'm not sure how many of you there will be, but what you'll
Thousands.
learn about me. Zero. What you'll learn about me going forward is that I solely play martial spellcasters. Like I'm Eldritch Knight, Hexblade, martial clerics. Like I want to wade into battle. I want to weigh the decision of like, hey, am I going to like use my attacks, or am I going to cast a spell this turn? I think it just like opens up so many options, even if it's like, you know, people are going to come at me and be like, well, if you're a Hexblade, it's better to just Eldritch Blast every turn. It's like, well, no, I want to play what I think is
fucking
fun.
boring.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. No, that's cool though. I didn't know that about you, because whenever we play 5e, you're the DM, and then whenever we play anything else tabletop, it's a completely different system, and you usually play like some sort of like cocky leadership type character.
Yeah, you think
I'd play a couple of 5es. Like one shots with Mike, where he's just like invented broken characters that beat everything I can attempt.
You say that, but I feel like I did that once with an Eldritch Knight for sure, and I am sorry about that one. But the other one, it was like a Christmas one. Actually, no, I guess there was a cleric.
You did the Last Airbender character for the arena battle.
Yeah,
and he died in like the first battle.
Yeah. He was skewered between two centaurs, even though he was Step of the Wind. Okay, so in terms of finishing off this stream, because I think that we're probably hitting like close to an hour at this point.
Sure.
I think we've done a great job providing a baseline for what Dragonlance is. We've figured out what we think our campaign is going to be. It's going to be 2 Knights of Solamnia on their journeys, on their heroic quests. In terms of providing finished character sheets. Oh, I said that I was going to create a character, but I guess
we'll have to see what happens next time.
Yeah, and you know what? So if you want to see the character I create, go check out the Lunar Sorcery Guide that has just come up on Arcane Eye. When I saw that subclass drop, I was like, I need to play that subclass. I probably will never play that subclass because I'm a forever DM when it comes to 5e, but it's definitely the most powerful sorcerer subclass, and my favorite character in the original Dragonlance books was Raistlin. I'm not sure how you pronounce the name, I've only ever read the books, who was like this like frail wizard And he was devoted to the red robes, but then eventually he's kind of like a turn bad, turn good kind of guy. So I think that him being my favorite character in Dragonlance, I would definitely go for like a more spell casting, more frail type of character who's just like, not much to look at, but then when he drops like a fifth level fireball, everyone's like, whoa. And I would also, if I was playing a character, definitely go through the path of Mages of Sorcery, because in this adventure, part of the Mages of Sorcery that we don't need to talk about for you guys because you guys won't experience it, but there's like this order of mages that kind of control like the arcane arts in this continent, and they're very exclusive. You have to take a test that if you fail, you die to get into their ranks, and the ranks are split between the white, the red, and the black robes. And part of this adventure, like you meet a couple of Mages of Sorcery, and then eventually you're able to take the test and choose your robes and stuff like that. And I just found it was really, really cool. And I would certainly want to go through that if I was being a player in this campaign. Maybe I will be. Maybe I'll DM PC and just break the game for you guys.
Do it. Do it.
But that's where we'll leave it off. Thanks very much for joining me today, Chris and Russ, and we'll talk to you when we start our campaign.
Arcane bye for now.
Arcane bye.
Bye.